Okay, we're live on Facebook, and we're really happy to have Kerrin O'Brien join us tonight from the Michigan Recycling Coalition. My name is Katie Deska, and I'm the Education Coordinator at the Surplus Store Recycling Center. Also joining us tonight is Chris Jolly, the manager of the Surplus Store Recycling Center. And we're going to have a conversation about why Michigan's policy regarding solid waste is so important and what changes are proposed and what that might mean for us in our day-to-day access to resource recovery options. So I'll let Chris and Kerrin just say hello, and then I'll provide a little bit more context as to their backgrounds.
Hey, I'm Chris Jolly. I manage the Surplus Store and Recycling Center. I've been here for off and on for 30 years. Known Kerrin a good chunk of that, so I'm happy to be here with her tonight.
Likewise, thanks for having me, Chris. Kerrin O'Brien. I'm Executive Director of the Michigan Recycling Coalition, and yep, we've been at this a very long time, so we hope to bring you up to speed really quickly tonight.
Great, thank you. Yeah, Kerrin and Chris have both been in the industry for multiple decades, and they share a passion for, a couple decades, over 20 years at least. And they both share a passion for resource conservation and education. Kerrin has been with the Michigan Recycling Coalition in a variety of capacities since 1993. And in addition to managing the organization, her interest lies in building consensus and movement around pro-recycling policies that work for both the public sector and the private sector. As a nonprofit development specialist and facilitator, Kerrin has led many nonprofit organizations through strategic planning and development efforts. And she has a social science bachelor's from MSU and completed the executive director development training program with the Institute for Conservation Leadership, which looked like a pretty interesting program when I looked at that later. I'm sure there's some other folks on here who are in the industry or interested in getting into it. We have a small group tonight, so I welcome anyone who would feel comfortable to turn their camera on. If you'd like, we will be, putting a few things in the chat box. Hi, Carolyn. Thanks for joining. Hi, Kate.
Hey, Hootie.
Awesome. Good to see some faces out there. And Chris Jolly has been with the Surplus Store Recycling Center in a variety of capacities. He joined our department as a student at Michigan State University and was the first student hired. And he's been instrumental.
Not the first student ever hired at MSU. I'm just to clarify.
Yeah. Thank you. First student at the what we now call Surplus and Recycling Department. But you do have a really great photo from back in the day, and I think we'll have to bring those out sometime.
Yeah, thanks.
So tonight we're going to be talking, hearing from Kerrin at first, and then she and Chris will talk a little bit more conversationally about these issues. So as we said, go ahead and throw any questions or comments in the chat as we go, and we'll put a few discussion prompts in there as well. So just to frame up the conversation a little bit, so MSU Surplus and Recycling works with the Recycling Coalition as a member of the coalition. MRC started about 40 years ago from a number of people who wanted to see these issues addressed from a policy perspective and work to advocate for resource conservation. And we've been a member and been active in the committees and on the board of directors. We participate with MRC both to share best practices and to learn from each other, all members of the coalition. And we also just discuss these important issues because this is a topic or an industry that is actually more complex than I think people think on the surface. When you start talking about recycling, it seems like it should be pretty straightforward, but you get into all the nitty-gritty and realize that when we say the word recycling, often we mean resource recovery and talking more about that broader sustainable materials management framework. And that's kind of the goal of some of the proposed changes to Michigan's state laws regarding solid waste. So while the federal government had set out some guidelines in 1965 to start to manage the way that waste was being disposed of to help avoid some of the challenges with open dumps and burning of waste. The responsibilities for things like landfill management falls to the states and then ultimately to municipalities. And so because of that structure, we have the capacity or the opportunity to direct Michigan in a forward motion towards a more sustainable management approach rather than what we currently have, which is that landfill centric approach. So that's what Kerrin's going to talk more about tonight. So I will just mute over here, and Kerrin, you should have the ability to share your screen and your slides.
It's disabled at this moment, so if you can enable that sharing, I will do that and take over here. Thank you all for having me. It's nice to see many friendly faces here today. I'll try. Did you get that screen?
Yeah,
I think it's under security preferences.
More. Okay, let's see. I'm sorry about that. We don't often host them as meetings, so.
I got it. Yep, I've got
Good.
the capabilities I'm sharing now. So I think we're ready to go. So I plan to make about 15, 20-minute presentation, and then we'll, have questions. But this is actually part of a presentation that I made to the Michigan House of Representatives, who has recently passed this 8-bill package that I'll be talking a little bit more about. So you really are on the inside of things today. So the Michigan Recycling Coalition has been around for almost 40 years now. We do a variety of things, but what we really want to do is enable our public and private sector partners who provide these services to advance their own goals and to learn and share with others who are also doing that work. I am a Michigan State grad. I have a social science degree, but my degree is in multidisciplinary social science. So I studied environmental issues and political science and sociology. So I really, in doing the job I do, it's really about how we move environmental issues through kind of our social political structures. And it's really what I've been spending my career doing. Just to put some context here, Michiganders spend $1 billion to manage our waste every year. Some of that money is spent on recycling and composting, but the vast majority of the money that we spend is really on collecting waste from the curb and burying it in the ground. And that's what we aim to change. If we can shift this $1 billion to make capital investments in doing something else, there are ways to pay for doing what we do to manage waste differently. And that's, again, what we intend to do. So right now, we are paying to landfill $600 million of material annually. That number fluctuates and changes based on the market for these different recyclable commodities or recycled commodities, but just the knowledge that we are paying to throw away material that has value in the marketplace should put us all on notice that there's a better way to do things. Most cities who provide recycling services are doing it still with small bins and containers. It's really the larger cities, those cities that have been committed and invested in recycling for many years, have switched to carts. The capacity difference is quite significant. With those bins, we are only collecting about 200 to 225 pounds of recyclables from the house on an annual basis. We more than double that with carts, and this is even, I think, a conservative estimate about what we can collect with carts. Single stream recycling is not the enemy. Single stream recycling was put in place because we can collect more from households by putting it all in the same truck and taking it to a MRF to be separated out. It saves money in collection, and most of the cost of moving these materials around is really about the collection costs. So curbside carts and single stream recycling really help us to lower those costs and collect more over time. With kind of current state standards in relation to recycling, really only 25 of our counties in Michigan meet any kind of, recycling access measures. So there's many people in Michigan that don't have access to good recycling opportunities. And part of our goal is really to deliver recycling services on par with waste services. If we can have trucks visiting 98% of Michigan households, we should be able to do that with recycling too. Recognizing that these are two separate services, whether it's providing curbside or drop-off services, everybody in Michigan deserves an opportunity to recycle their material. So the policies that we're living under right now really started back in the mid 80s. There was this Mobro garbage barge that left the New York harbor carrying waste from, I think, the Fresh Kills landfill as it was closing. This barge traveled up and down the eastern seaboard, stopping at every single port to see if it could unload its garbage on any of the port cities. Every single one of them turned this garbage away. It traveled all the way down to Belize and then back to New York to have it be disposed at the same place that it left from. The federal government saw what was happening and said, we can't have this. This is not the way to manage our waste. And so federal law requires all states to plan for solid waste. So Michigan does that, and Michigan puts that responsibility on counties through county solid waste planning. Whoops, I think but current statute is really about assuring that every county in Michigan has 5.5 years of disposal capacity for all of the waste generated in its county. If that county can't demonstrate that it has capacity through a landfill or an incinerator in its own county, then it has to make an agreement with a surrounding county that has a landfill that they will accept that waste. If that can't happen, then that county has to make room or has to make way for the development of additional disposal capacity. So our solid waste law is really built around assuring that we have 100% disposal capacity for 100% of our waste. Just as Katie said, this is a landfill disposal centric policy, and that's what we aim to turn over, because in the past 25 years, we've really grown to understand the value of the materials that we're putting in our landfill, and of course, the cost of maintaining those landfills over time and assuring that there's no problems with those landfills. So what the changes that are proposed in policy right now are really about prioritizing productive materials management over landfilling as we move forward. So Michigan has a recycling rate of about 18% right now. It is about the lowest in the Great Lakes area. Our Great Lakes partners do better than us. Nationally, the average for recycling is about 34%. We can probably recycle about 70% of what we throw away if we had good systems to collect the materials we know are recyclable or compostable today. The problem is that infrastructure isn't in place to collect that and manage that in a meaningful way. So that's our goal, is to really change that. Michigan's recycling rate is very low because, frankly, we haven't really invested in recycling. The state has just begun to lead the way to recycling. Recycling has really grown up in Michigan by businesses and communities making their own investments in providing services or in making sure they have the equipment to bale and transport material to end markets. If we could recycle up to our goal, which is 45% in this proposed bill, it would mean economic growth. It would mean 138,000 people employed in recycling. It would mean $9 billion in annual labor revenue from recycling. It would mean $33 billion in economic output annually. So these are significant measures of economic growth and progress that really rival the tourism industry. But waste is invisible. This stuff gets put at the curb and we don't see where it goes and nobody asks questions, but there's not one person, company, organization that does not produce waste, and yet we don't pay much attention to it. So we've been working on these issues for a very long time, but in 2011, the Michigan Recycling Coalition decided for itself that one of the things that it really needed to bring to the table was ongoing funding for recycling. So we developed a report back in 2007 that said that if we could recycle it 50%, it would mean this much value to the economy. And that report really got play and got the attention of the then governor, Rick Snyder. So we worked with him throughout his tenure, his 8 years in office, to move forward these initiatives. And just before he left office, we were able to secure funding for recycling. What's significant about this is that not only were we able to secure funding for $24 million for recycling, we secured $45 million for contaminated site cleanup. Together, $69 million. This is the most significant environmental funding, ongoing funding bill that has ever been passed in Michigan. So it was a very significant development for us, and we're now reaping the benefits of having funding. The challenge is that when we were working on funding, we also started to work on policy advancement. And it became very apparent at the end of Governor Snyder's term that he had to pick which issue to make his pet issue. And funding, he was a budget guy, and so funding was really what he took to heart. And it makes our job a little bit easier, frankly, because now we really only have to worry about passing the policy. Anyway, of the $24 million, $15 million is really earmarked to go out to counties and communities and private sector partners to help them develop markets and to develop the infrastructure necessary to move these materials to where they can be used most productively. $9 million is really used to oversee a growing and developing industry to assure, for example, that composters aren't just accumulating organics and leaving them to rot on their fields, that this material is actually processed into compost, which is a valuable end product to amend soils. So this 8-bill package, House Bills 4454 through 4461, were a bipartisan heavy lift by House Republicans. Gary Howell is a Republican that really spearheaded the whole effort. But there was a group at the same time, there were two groups working, Governor's Recycling Council, to identify what we needed to do to grow recycling in Michigan. And then there was another group working at the same time, the Solid Waste and Recycling Advisory Panel, to really look at the language of our current laws to see what needed to be changed to be more inclusive of materials management. And what really resulted is this 50-page bill, or this 50-page law, has turned into about a 230-page bill. It really grew because, one, the policy hadn't been updated for 25 years, and two, we really needed to add a lot of language around productive materials management and update kind of the county solid waste managing process. And I'll say more about that soon. But the goals of the Part 115 rewrite are really to level the playing field, to remove that policy preference we have for disposal so that recycling and composting operations can compete with disposal operations. Right now, the profit margins are so slim for recycling and composting that it's much easier to just dispose of stuff than it is to recycle and compost. So we need to write the policy to create the right kind of environment to grow businesses that can productively use our materials. And so we're setting new recycling goals in this bill. We're setting these benchmark recycling standards, which means that communities greater than 5,000 people now are asked to make progress toward providing curbside recycling by said date. And communities that don't need to provide curbside services then are asked to provide drop-off services by said date. And they're incentivized with carrots, because if they can demonstrate they're making progress toward these goals, then they get access to certain pots of funding to help them to get there. So all of this effort is to really re-engage local governments in planning. County planning is the mechanism by which counties pull together municipalities and private sector landfills and recycling facilities, environmental groups, to talk about how waste and materials are going to be managed in that county. And then this group then comes up with the plan. And for example, the plan could say, you know what, we really want to compost here in, Oscoda County, but we don't have any compost facilities. So we're going to make way for the development of 2 compost facilities so that we can assure there's the means to manage our organics in a more productive way. That plan then becomes the kind of the strategic vision for what is going to happen in this region. Previously, because state government requires counties to plan, state government in Michigan has to pay for that. They paid for that for the first round of planning back in 1994, but they haven't paid for that since that time. And so for the past 25 years, these plans have only been updated when a landfill has wanted to expand, because landfill expansions have to be done in the context of county planning. So a landfill that's in Oscoda County that wants to, for example, expand can say, hey, you need to open your plan so we can explore expansion. Don't worry, we'll pay for it, but we need to open the plan. So this whole planning process really became a means for landfills to expand their facilities. So much so that we have an overcapacity of landfills in Michigan, and it keeps the price of landfilling artificially low. Again, that's why we need to readjust these policies to put all of these kind of ways we manage our waste on a more even playing field. And then, of course, over time, now that we know that we can use materials more productively, this is about updating regulations and making sure that we have the proper oversight tools to make sure landfills are doing their job safely, that compost operations are doing their job safely, for health and human welfare and environmental health, and all the like. There is a stick to get people to do this, and I guess I'll talk about that more as we go forward. So I talked a little bit about the benchmark recycling standards. This is really how the rubber meets the road, because if people can't get services to make sure that they have access to recycling, well, then we can't provide business with the volume of materials they need to make commitments to use this recycled material in new products. So it's really about the public and private partnership that's necessary to pull materials out of households and businesses and make them available to manufacturers. The package of bill also talks about making sure that there's host community approval for these sites. So there's a delicate balancing act that has to happen in this package of bills. There's a syndrome called NIMBY, not in my backyard, because nobody wants a landfill in their community. And, people feel like compost facilities can be smelly too. And so now they're saying, I don't want that in my community either. But we have to take care and be responsible for our own materials. And so these facilities have to be sited somewhere. And this bill assures that those facilities can be sited, but it aims through these host community approvals to make sure that the host community, that those facilities are assets to the host community rather than deficits for the host community, either by paying them for hosting that facility or making sure they're just operating above board. County solid waste planning is also good because counties can work with their communities to assure that the plans they put together really work for their counties. Washtenaw County or Ingham County is very different than Oscoda County or Marquette County. They have very different needs and very different capacities, different manufacturing needs. And so these counties get to, kind of create their own goals and their own plans, but they're always having to show progress toward benchmark standards and state recycling goals. So just riffing more on what this big package of bill does, it really makes sure that any of these facilities that are developed to comply with the laws, of course, but also to comply with the goals of the county plan. If somebody comes in and says, I want to, burn rubber to do this great thing, the county has some recourse through the county plan to say, you know what, that's not for us. Thanks anyway. We're taking care of that through these measures. So it gives the county some capacity to say, no, thank you. And if the county can demonstrate that they're taking care of their waste through recycling and composting, they may be even able to say, no, thank you to future landfill development. That's what's important here. Because current solid waste law is really built around landfilling, there's a lot of requirements of landfills in current law, and new law, these proposed changes are really just updating those. Financial assurance is really about landfills taking out bonds on their facility to make sure, it's basically an insurance policy, that if there's a catastrophic failure or if there's a bankruptcy, there's money in the bank that Eagle can go to if they need to clean up the mess. Financial assurance levels have been low for a very long time. They haven't been increased in 25 years. And there are cases that Eagle has taken on a facility that has gone bankrupt, and now we, the taxpayers, are paying for the management of that facility. Financial assurance is there to increase the ability for us to make sure that those can be taken care of by the facility and not us taxpayers. But having said that, landfills are always going to be a risk that we take on as a Michigan. And then there's also updating some closure requirements. There's a lot of discussion around whether a landfill is functionally stable and when you can close it and walk away, or consider it closed and walk away. Private sector partners own these landfills, but ultimately when they walk away, that landfill remains a problem for whatever municipality hosted that landfill. So there are a little bit more kind of clear operations around how you close a landfill, how that landfill settles and develops functional stability over time, and then how you care for that landfill into perpetuity so a tree doesn't grow there and pop the cap and then let water in that starts to get the landfill percolating again. All of these things are considerations in these bills. And this last bullet is really about the stick that I talked about in this bill. If a county chooses not to plan, then the state is going to have to plan for them. And the state then can say, okay, any hauler operating within that county now has to provide recycling services throughout the county. It doesn't necessarily mean that the residents don't have to pay for it. We're all going to have to pay for it, but all those opportunities at least have to be offered at that benchmark level. And this is kind of an important effort. If a county's not going to do it, then we're going to do it for them. And the state then has the capacity to make service providers make sure the service is being provided. So I think this is the last slide about the bills, but there's a whole new section of the bills that really increase regulations on composting operations. There have been some challenges to Michigan composters over the past 15 years. Sometimes a operator will collect a tipping fee to collect the yard waste, for example, that can't be disposed in the landfill because we have a landfill ban. So they'll collect a tipping fee for this yard waste. They'll pile it up in a big pile, but they won't do anything to it. They won't process it or turn it into compost. So then it ends up being a big, stinky, messy pile of organic waste. And we can't have that because it's a nuisance for the neighbor who lives, a mile down the road who has to smell this pile. So it puts some more regulations on composters. It allows Eagle to go in there to inspect the site and to assure that they're operating above board. It also updates county solid waste planning to county materials management planning so that we get into the mindset of really thinking about these materials as resources instead of just waste, because there's always a time to add to that. And again, I already talked about this, but all of this really assures that funding is available and for all the uses, for grants, for development, for planning, and it also assures that these facilities can be sited. Right now, this set of bills is in the Senate Regulatory Reform Committee. This is not the committee we thought it would go to. We thought it would go to an Environmental Quality Committee, but this chair asked to have these bills, and now we have to bring them up to speed quickly. Unfortunately, there's some misinformation about these bills. They think there are recycling mandates in the bills. They think that it increases the cost through increased tip fee surcharges, which is a surcharge on the tip fees we pay for landfills, but none of that is true. This is really about modernizing our waste laws so that we can be more inclusive of better ways to manage our materials over time. So if you live in any of these areas or not, this is a good time to reach out to your senator over the summer to say, hey, I support these bills. This is a good thing for Michigan. We do not need to be the Great Lakes dumping ground for waste because our waste fees are so low. Let's see. I did want to say a little bit about Recycle Michigan. Dave Smith, who is on our board of directors, works for Surplus and Recycling, is the chair of this committee. This is kind of our statewide campaign to just support those of you that are interested in recycling. You can sign up for a monthly newsletter where we provide you with information about recycling, what's happening, information and education about the materials and how to recycle better and more, and what else is happening around the state. And organizations can become partners of Recycle Michigan. We develop a social media plan to continually update people on social media about all the great things that are happening in recycling and how they can be better recyclers. So we encourage you to come visit us at recyclemichigan.org, but we're on all over social media too, so keep your eyes out for that. And if you have any questions, you can always reach out to me. I'm happy to talk about this stuff. It's my favorite topic. that's all I have prepared right now, Chris.
Awesome. Thank you, Karen. We do have a pretty small group, so if you have questions, you can feel free to unmute and ask or type it in chat, and I can also read those. I had a couple questions, Karen.
Yeah.
So I can see a good future for those 58 underserved counties in Michigan and where this is going to go. But what are some of the low hanging fruit you think that could change for those of us here right in Lansing? Like how can this change stuff? What are some of the earliest changes we might see?
Yeah, I think organics is going to be a hot topic for this region. There is no way I think we can get to 45% recycling in this region without addressing organics in a meaningful way. And then when you think about food waste and the climate impacts of food waste, we really got to get a better handle on those organics. So, curbside composting collection. We already, the cities of Lansing and East Lansing already collect yard waste at the curbside. It's not a far leap to have food waste collected at the curbside as well, but it's going to take a lot of education for us to get there. We have a new MRF in this area. And, I'm hoping that that new MRF gives us the capacity to collect, more and different types of plastic. Plastic is something that is a challenging beast because there's so many different types of plastic, but the Mtera MRF has separation capacity for number fives, for instance, yogurt containers and that kind of thing. And so it's possible that this Mtera in this region can serve as kind of a regional hub for other materials, other like 3 through 7 plastics. Michigan State is a great center of research for what else we can do with those other materials. So with those other types of plastics, thermoforms, clamshell plastics. So I'm really hoping, and you and I need to talk about this, Chris, that we can create kind of a partnership team to tackle some of these bigger plastic issues and bring solutions to mid-Michigan and beyond.
Cool. So Mtera, just for those of you who don't know, they're right next to right across the expressway there from, or not the expressway, but the train tracks, the low hanging bridge there on Pennsylvania, right by Potter Park. They service Lansing and East Lansing currently. I don't know if they've expanded any further than that or if they're bringing in stuff farther, but Lansing and East Lansing used to take recycling as to Ann Arbor, I believe at one time as far as Traverse City. So that's really helpful for all of us. The reason why our facility exists is because at the time, there was not a recycling facility between Ann Arbor and Grand Rapids. So we had to build something to answer our needs because we couldn't afford trucking that material that far away. So that's exciting. Lots of different options.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I think the fact that you guys have a recycling center is really exciting and puts MSU in a kind of an interesting place, a great place for kind of research and development of new opportunities and ideas. And with Next Cycle Michigan developing, I think that there's some new synergies that can happen with MSU because of your capacity.
Cool. We have a lot of chat on the board.
Yeah.
And had in previous meetings about confusion at the bin, confusion in education. Are there any efforts in standardizing a little bit more about what we all accept and how we talk about what we accept? Where do you see that going?
Yeah, that's a really challenging topic because the state didn't really guide the development of recycling because that happened individually because counties or communities, the city of Ann Arbor, for instance, decided that it needed these services and developed its own MRF long ago. You see that these kind of independent silos of opportunities kind of popped up as communities and companies were making investments. It is going to take us a long time to standardize anything, and it's really going to take a lot of investment and commitment if we're interested in standardizing those opportunities. The other challenges I see is that it depends on what markets are available to us. the example, there's a company called Great Lakes Tissue in northern Michigan that takes cartons, for instance, aseptic packages and cartons, and that makes it really easy and unique for most Michiganders to be able to recycle that stuff. But if you don't happen to be close to Michigan, you may not have access to that marketplace. And so those considerations happen for every single material you have. And different competitors operate different MRFs and have different relationships with different markets. And so it really makes that standardization challenging. So the best I can say about, curbing the confusion is to put that flyer on your fridge and know intimately what the materials are that are, accepted in your cart. And if you don't see it on that, flyer, don't put it in your cart. It may be recyclable, and it is likely recyclable through other channels, but it doesn't belong in your curbside cart.
I'll pause for a second and give anybody else a chance who has a question if you want to ask. Otherwise, I've got more.
Yeah, I've got a question. So Kieran, you talked about the curbside food waste collection.
Yeah.
Is there any feasibility with like a drop-off center of kind of meeting in the middle? Because I know that there's a lot of trucks and extra work needed to get a curbside collection going like that. Would a drop-off center work?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, Chris. I definitely think it can. I have seen it. But we may be talking about something that looks a little bit different than what we think of as a, recycling drop off. So rather than dumping it off and leaving, maybe it's a small managed compost pile right there, or material is mixed there and then transferred off site. The thing about this really stinky putrescible food waste mix is that it's got to be incorporated with leaves and other carbon material pretty quickly, or it starts to stink. And so whatever drop off we have, it's either going to have to be in a big container that can be mixed so that it's picked up once a week, or it's got to be picked up kind of every couple days and taken, so it's a big maybe a big roll off or drop off, something like that, container.
Hey,
So
Karen,
oh,
got a
go ahead.
question. Is there anything in this package of bills that addresses those hard to recycle items, things like electronics, batteries, those type of materials?
That's a good question. Not directly. There's another bill on the books that addresses electronic waste. Public Act 173 is what creates the e-waste take back program, and that says that anybody who sells or distributes their electronic product has to take that back from us for free. The system is a little bit broken. We're working now to change that law. But this 115 work is really about creating the right policy framework on which we can answer all different kinds of questions. And so while it doesn't directly deal with those specific issues, it does create the framework within which communities can answer those questions for themselves and provide guidance necessary to municipalities and townships operating in those counties.
Karen, I got a question to go off of what Rich said in the chat. He was just talking about that even the flyers are confusing, and just the labeling on some plastics is confusing, and he would love to get more feedback from his hauler or the municipality that he recycles with. So is there anything in the county planning process, when that happens, that would increase the amount of education that would be required by municipalities or haulers to reach their population?
Yeah. There is a kind of a minimum standard established in that bill, but the law is not the place where they've defined what it means to have good education. Where I think that rubber meets the road is in kind of rule making, and in Eagle just supporting the industry. Now that there is support at the state level for recycling, I think that we have staff at Eagle who can begin to address some of these questions. And I hope the Michigan Recycling Coalition is still supported by members like you, so that we can continue to push us in the right direction. I think the hard part about it is that there are many different ways to accomplish these goals, so it's hard to kind of set in stone what should happen. But we can certainly provide best practice opportunity, educational opportunities, so that educators can go out there kind of with the best possible tools to do the work that needs to be done. But the work really has to be done on the local level, because all of these, because the municipalities are in a MRF shed, a material recovery facility shed. And so a MRF really influences what can be accepted in that community, and should be then communicating really clearly to that community what can be accepted at that MRF. And so those were more about standards of working and operating together. And it's just something we're going to have to continue working on together.
So I'd like to kind of tag on to Dave's question a little bit and just give a little bit more feedback about those hard to recycle items. There is Next Cycle, which we didn't talk about a whole lot, which is a funding mechanism. It's a system of grants for different types of businesses and nonprofits to incentivize either starting collecting, hauling, revolutionizing recycling, taking new materials. And Kerrin and I are both on committees reviewing those grant applications, and we read everything from things focused on wood waste to 3D printer plastic waste and the list goes on. So yes, and it's not addressed specifically in the bills, but the funding mechanisms that are in place are looking at expanding to other materials and looking at for innovative ways to manage waste as a resource. So that's exciting.
And, frankly, Chris, I really feel like when this package passes, that's me being very optimistic, when this package passes, the director will call for counties to plan for the first time in, 26 or 7 years. And I really think that means that we will have this really comprehensive conversation. Everybody in the state, every county in the state will be having this conversation, and it's going to be, kind of a storm when we all start talking about this stuff, because it is the reason for us to kind of meet and talk and figure some of this stuff out, which we really haven't had the means to do in 20 years.
You also talked about the carrot and the stick a little bit. I'm wondering, one of the challenges that I've seen with managing organic waste is, what do we do with all the compost that we create as a finished product, and how do we generate enough revenue from it to cover the cost of creating it, because it's not usually a funded program. We have to, there's a lot of expense to it. With that carrot and stick, are there anything's being done to incentivize farms or other folks to use compost in lieu of synthetic fertilizers and other things? Are there any?
That's not really addressed in a policy in this bill, especially farms. There's a lot of policy that allow farms to do what they need to do to provide us with food. And so really the effort in creating markets for compost is to convince people or share with people the value of compost as a soil amendment that builds a healthy soil food web that makes pesticides and herbicides less needed, that it improves downstream water quality. There's a whole bunch of reasons why compost is good, but we've gotten away from using it because we depend on, other means. So we got a grant from Eagle to help land-based industries in Michigan, landscape architecture architects and civil engineers understand how compost can be used to mitigate soil erosion, to keep nutrients on the land and not leaching into water systems. So that's more about kind of education and helping people see the value. When people learn that it takes 100 years to grow an inch of topsoil, and we're throwing our organics into the landfill where they're never to be seen again, it does strike fear in the heart. And that's what we hope people see through our education effort.
And then at our last town hall, we somebody asked a question about the bottle bill and expanding the bottle bill to take water bottles and things like that. Water bottle, I know the water bill comes up a lot. What is the current talk around the bottle bill?
Yeah, there's always just some perspective. The bottle bill's been around for 40 years and it has never changed. We've got two opposing sides, those who are for the bottle bill and those who are against it. And the opposition is so fierce that nothing's ever happened. The bill's never changed. The current discussion is about the money generated from the sheets. So when we don't return bottles and cans to the store, when they just get recycled or thrown away or littered, the state holds that dime in its coffers, and 25% of that sheet goes to help retailers pay for managing the bottles and cans, and 75% goes to pay for the cleanup of contaminated sites. Well, over the COVID times, people weren't returning bottles and cans, and that sheet fund has more than doubled. So the conversation around the bottle bill is really about the money that the bottle bill is generating right now. And it's really ironic because the sheet fund grows as bottle deposits decrease. And when bottle deposits are decreasing, it's facilities like yours that are taking and managing more of these containers, but you don't get any of that bottle bill proceed. So I think we'll see more proposals to expand the bottle bill, and we'll see more proposals to repeal the bottle bill, and we'll see more efforts to try to, divert those funds to other places. I'm frankly not sure what is going to gain favor, because changes to the bottle bill require 3/4 vote of the legislature, because it was, it happened through a citizen referendum, and it needs 3/4 majority to change it.
I guess finally, I'm going to ask one other big question, and other people can ask questions too if they have them. Me is just Joe Recycler or Josephine Recycler or whomever I am today. Is there anything I can do currently to help move these bills forward or give them support?
Yes, most definitely. Your senators need to hear from you. And it's as simple as picking up the phone and talking to whoever answers it in your senator's office and say, I just want to register my support for these bills that seek to modernize or update solid waste laws, House bills, whatever. You need to have the key phrase, House bills 4454 through 4461, or that update part 115. All you need to say is that. You can say a whole lot more, but all you really need to say is, I want to register my support for these bills. And I'll say too that we have sign-on letters. We have a template that you can use to show your support. So you can simply send a letter to your senator based on a template that we've provided, that I can make available to Katie to follow up with you all or something. But this is a time when your involvement in politics is of value. So we hope that you take the step in.
And in these days and times, this is one of those odd ones that does have some bipartisan support and a different mix of people supporting the bill, and some
Yes.
people not supporting it that you would suspect would. So it's pretty fascinating how these have gone.
Yeah, it's really ironic that these bills were well, the funding bill was passed under a Republican governor, that this whole effort was really forwarded by a Republican governor, that the work that was done in the House was by a Republican lawmaker. We just hope that the senators feel like that was a worthy effort on their part, and that they continue kind of that forward movement. We've heard it being talked about as, a democratic issue, but I don't think it's a partisan issue at all. I think it's a waste issue, and it matters to all of us, and we're all a part of the solution, frankly, and we need to see it that way.
Great, thank you.
Thank
Katie, do you
you.
want to bring us home?
Yeah, thank you very much, Kerrin. You covered a lot of ground there, and there's obviously a lot of details that are in those bills that we didn't touch on, but I appreciate the large overview that you gave us. And one of the spots that I find most interesting actually is the way that it's kind of creating some regulations around composting facilities, especially, and some more oversight on recycling facilities. Hopefully that will become more embedded. And then, maybe that next phase can go into some of these other questions like, education or just making things more understandable for the public. So we appreciate you coming out today, and thanks to everybody for coming and participating. I'm going to throw in a link for the surplus store or coupon. It's for 15% off. You can use it at the checkout online, and that's good until July 22nd. And then we have a event survey if you'd like to fill that out, along with the option of including your email if you want to be added to receive notification of other events, similar to this. And then lastly, we have our town hall scheduled for July on Thursday, the 22nd. We're moving these to daytime hours. Currently it's scheduled for 11 a.m. And we're going to be mostly focusing on updates related to the surplus store and recycling operations starting this fall. So thank you again, Kerrin, for joining us, and for Chris for facilitating the conversation, and to everyone who came out tonight. I'll leave the chat up for a few minutes just in case anyone wants to get any of the links in there. And Kerrin did say she was willing to allow us to post her slides, so we'll do that to our website later on in the next couple of weeks here. And we can follow up with an email with this coupon as well.
Thank you so much.
Great.
Appreciate
Thanks,
the
Katie.
opportunity.
Thanks, Kerrin.
Nice to see you all. Thanks, Chris.
Thanks,
Have a good
Kerrin.
night. Bye-bye.
Take care. Okay, I'm going to stop.